My next guest is Evan Robb. He is the principal of Johnson Williams Middle School in Berryville, Virginia. He has over 20 years of experience serving as a building level principal. Prior to being a school principal, he was an English teacher, department chair, and assistant principal. Evan is a recipient of the Horace Mann Educator of the Year Award. In addition, the NCTE Commission on Reading selected him to serve on its national board. As a TEDx speaker, Evan offers inspirational keynotes, workshops, webinars, and ongoing professional learning opportunities on leadership, mindset, culture, impactful change, and how to improve literacy in schools. Evan has shared his ideas with thousands of educators at dozens of workshops across the United States and in other countries. Evan's also an accomplished author. His first book, titled The Principal's Leadership Sourcebook, Practices, Tools, and Strategies for Building a Thriving School Community, was published in 2007. His second book, The 10-Minute Principal, was published in 2019. Evan and his mother, Laura Robb, have collaborated to write Team Makers, which was published later in 2019. And Evan partnered again with Laura Robb to write A School Full of Readers, which was published in early 2020. Thank you for being on the podcast, Evan.
Hey, thank you very much, Dana. Really excited to have an opportunity to chat about something that I think you and I are both really enthusiastic about, which is leadership, teaching, and learning.
Yes. Well, everyone I have on the podcast, I have them tell a little bit about a story of when they were in the trenches and managed to crawl out. So let me know a little bit about the story that you have to share about this.
Well, that is a very interesting question, and probably have a lot of stories with that. You know, one of the things that it's kind of odd that I'm getting more comfortable with is that, you know, like when you read someone's bio, and my bios, I appreciate that. It sounds really good. But what people don't know sometimes is all the hardships, headaches, and challenges, you know, that occurred beforehand that kind of get you to a place in your life where hopefully things are a little bit better. So I think one of the things that I would share is really more personal. It's less about you know, a particular job related thing of being in the trenches. But when I was a new teacher, I took kind of a roundabout way to teaching. I actually finished an MBA and thought that I wanted to do that, and then decided that I didn't. This, of course, to my parents' chagrin, because they paid for it. They weren't thrilled to hear that, but I decided that I wanted to be a teacher. Both of my parents were teachers, and I felt really drawn to it. But my first job was in Culpeper, Virginia, which was about 88 miles door to door from my house to Culpeper. And I made so little money the first year that I couldn't afford to live there. And I had to commute. So, you know, I recall the number 88 really well because I drove 88 miles to and from work every day for an entire school year. And so I had a lot of time to think if this is what I wanted to do. There were absolutely times when I was completely convinced that it wasn't because it was just too hard and I couldn't earn a living and I was getting engaged. But I stuck with it. And I don't say that to give myself a little pat on the back or a medal. I just did it because for whatever reason, it was right for me, and I decided that I would continue to give it a try. Found a job that was closer to home, and then was able to really find a lot of joy in teaching English and history, and also department leadership, and becoming an administrator also. I think the other thing that I'd share, and I like to share this with people because I think it's important, is, you know, I've been a principal for a long time, and there's a lot of advantages to that, but and some disadvantages too, but one of the things that you see is over time you work for different superintendents. And one of the things that I've learned is there's a certain type of superintendent that I can work really well with. And I'm very fortunate to have that person right now. I'm running our school division. He's fantastic. But I have had some that I did not like working with, I guess, to be really blunt. Because of either their leadership style or their personality deficiencies. And, you know, that at times put me in positions where I wasn't really sure, again, whether, you know, I should stick with this or whether I should go somewhere else. But time has a way of working things out. And fortunately for me, as I reflect back, I guess I made some decent decisions because I found myself with some more smooth air right now. If we can call the time of COVID smooth air, and we'll probably get to that a little later in the podcast, but at least personally smoother air.
Yeah, and so having been in that area for such a long time as a principal, you've seen a lot of changes, and it's at least at a place in your district that, you know, you have great leadership. So dealing with COVID challenges, you feel like you're able to, the district's able to handle it better than maybe with somebody that you've worked with in the past.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think that part of the test of leadership is not how someone manages things when everything is great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the challenge is how does someone mobilize, work with a team, keep focused on vision, strategic plan, mission during times that are really challenging, during times where there is no right answer, and trying to figure out what the best directionality is for a school division and to work with a team is really challenging. And I think that school divisions that are fortunate to have that level of leadership will move through this time much better than school divisions that have the opposite.
Yeah, and we're seeing that throughout the country right now. So
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the 10-minute principle, which I read about a year ago when it came out. And in this book, it's a short read. It's very easy to read. Outline strategies for principal in a format where you can just take one chapter at a time, and you have you know, some plans. You have outlines of next action steps. I think one can just pick up the book for a few minutes at a time and gain worthy insight. It's a great tool for principals to refer back to on a day-to-day basis. So when you were writing the book, did you have certain leaders in mind as you wrote the book, such as new principals, those who work in a high-stress environment, or principals who lack support?
Yeah, probably yes to all of the above. You know, I've had an opportunity to mentor a lot of principals over the years, and you know, started seeing some commonalities with where new principals were struggling a little bit, and one of them was learning how to be more intentional and more proactive with your leadership versus feeling like your world is running you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to come up with, and I appreciate the words that you said about the book, because you kind of hit the nail on the head. The way that I wrote this book is it is not necessarily meant to be read from page 1 to the last page.
Mm-hmm.
You can pick up anywhere, and each chapter is structured almost exactly the same. So you just look in the beginning of the book and you say, okay, this is a topic that I'm interested in. You go to that chapter, and it will be comforting because it will be structured exactly the same as other chapters in the book, where you can get 10-minute tips, 10-minute collaborative opportunities, and things of that nature. So my core purpose with it was to provide a resource that someone could have on their desk, and I actually have my little copy on my desk also, where you can quickly get ideas while you're eating lunch, having a cup of coffee. It is not meant to be, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but it's not an academic read.
Mm-hmm.
It is just my goal is me speaking with you, the other person who's reading it, sharing some tips. And I also wanted to make sure in the book that I shared some mishaps that I had along the way. And I've had many of them, and I put them in the book because I think it's important for me to share some of my truths, which some of them are good and some of them not so good, but also I hope it makes it a little more relatable to
Mm-hmm.
a principal who's struggling and just trying to learn the ropes, of the job.
Yeah, and I think you dive into several aspects of leadership that principals on a day-to-day basis might not be thinking about, or these are some things that maybe they can think about as we go into the next school year, such as how to utilize your office staff to their full potential, and video communications with stakeholders. I know some principals are maybe a little bit nervous about putting themselves on video, but right now with remote or hybrid learning situations, having a name with a face goes a long way with those stakeholders.
Yeah, it really does. I think, so a couple of things, like with the office staff, I do dive into customer service in the office staff. The front office are the first people that parents speak to when they call into the building and who they see when they come into the building. Mm-hmm. And customer service is one of those things that sometimes people make a presumption that it just sort of happens organically. Yeah. And if you have the right person, maybe it does. But I have found that clarifying, working with a team to kind of make sure that we have the best communication with our families, that we're putting a smile on our face, and that we're giving the kind of service that makes people feel good is really important. You certainly don't want people in a small community, griping about the secretary in your front office. Mm-hmm. It doesn't help the principal, and it certainly doesn't help the school. So investing some time in that I think is important. Not a lot of time, but some time. And I give some tips in the book, but hopefully if someone hasn't read the book, you can check that out. Now, as for video is a great way for administrators and teachers and superintendents to be able to connect with kids, families, and a community. And it is a little bit awkward, and sometimes people shy away from it because it's something that they're not comfortable with, they think they won't be good at. But my experience is people really like to see a face, and they like to hear, the voice and be able to see the face. And when I first started doing it, I think I made some that were probably not that good, but I never had anyone send me an email saying, "Oh my gosh, never do video again, you're horrible at it." And just like anything, and this is something that we teach kids, which is that with most things in life, if you practice and you try to get better at something, you typically do.
Mm-hmm.
And even better, if you have a good coach who can give you a little advice along the way, you can get better much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a very good medium to connect. And there's simple ways to do that through a recording on Zoom. If you have Google, Screencastify is a great extension for Zoom, where you can do a recording also, or recordings through Facebook.
Yeah. And I even talked to a principal a few weeks ago for the podcast who does TikTok videos, and he has a lot of Twitter followers that way. So
it is a really good way to make connections. And again, when I first started as a principal, that wasn't around. And so my communications to parents were the dry academic sort of business-like writing that had been drilled into me through graduate school. And no one really could know me as a person, unless they were just in and out of school a lot. And sometimes there are parents that are, but there are many parents that just are not because of their life circumstances. But a video can be mailed home, emailed home, and people can get information that way and build a stronger connection with the administrator or a teacher.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Tell me about some feedback you have had regarding the 10-minute principle and how it has improved other principals' practice since the book came out.
Well, in general, the feedback that I get is fortunately pretty consistent with what I was trying to do when I wrote the book, which is people start understanding that it is a book that they can quickly access tips that can give them some ideas. It's not a book written like I am the be-all expert at all. I would never ever claim that, but it is an opportunity for me to be a guide and a partner with someone to help them think, or maybe reflect, or possibly consider a different way to do something, in regards to their leadership. The other message that I get at times is that the book helps people focus a little more on the intentionality of their leadership. And that kind of comes at the beginning of the book, where I talk about the 6 pillars of leadership, and I talk about trust and vision and relationships and student-centered environment and structural knowledge, those kind of things. So giving someone a framework to think about what they do and help make decisions that are consistent with the framework and hopefully consistent with their beliefs, but not just their beliefs, but the collective beliefs of their school and their school division.
Yeah, I think that ties a lot into what we talked about in the pre-chat, a little bit about your work with your mother-in-law, Robb, and how your writing with her has evolved in the past 10 to 12 years, how you started writing a blog with her, and now you've written several books on literacy. And we talked a little bit about how many principals, they're kind of distance themselves from the classroom, right? And they're not thinking so much about what's going on in the classroom other than observing, for observation's sake, but not really how to teach more effectively. So I think that's great how you've been working in literacy. And so tell me a little bit about how that writing story has evolved with Laura.
My mother is a very prolific writer. She's written over 30 books. And one of the things really interesting about her, I don't think I've ever shared this before in a podcast, but she retired from the classroom from being a full-time teacher at 55. And she had never written a book at 55. But she was able to kind of reinvent herself and have this just wonderful second career. And the reason that I share that is, sometimes people feel that, a person's particular age sort of dictates what they can and cannot do in life. You know, it's like, okay, you know, you're 65 years old, so you can't work anymore. You need to go play golf, or you need to just, you know, stay at home. But she's really taught me that age is only a number, and that there's always opportunities to reinvent yourself and be what you want to be. So one of the things that she's helped me a lot with is learning how to write in a way that's more relatable to people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I felt reasonably comfortable with academic writing when I was out of school, or what I would call rather dry writing. But the writing that's needed for a book or a blog or an article has to have more voice. So she has served as my teacher, and she is a tough teacher, but has taught me a lot, and I really appreciate that. I guess the other thing, I've never shared this before either, is she actually was my teacher when I was in 5th grade.
Oh, wow.
She was, and I couldn't get an A to save my life.
Ah.
It was very, very hard on me when I was a little guy. But oddly enough, you know, and if you'd asked me when I was 12 years old, do I ever want my mother to be my teacher again, I would say, oh my gosh, absolutely not. And now, you know, as a grown man, I am incredibly grateful and incredibly indebted to have her as a teacher to teach me how to write in a different kind of way. We both share a very strong passion for reading and literacy. That is absolutely her wheelhouse. It is, you know, I focus on literacy in partnership with focusing a lot on leadership and that aspect of the principal position. But as you and I were talking before we started recording, you know, literacy, instruction, those things are pretty important if you're a principal. And so making sure that, you know, your people are abreast of best practices, of research, and how to create those cultures of reading is important. So we've had a great time working on books together. We wrote a book with Dave Burgess Publishing called Tea Makers, and a book with Benchmark Publishing called A School Full of Readers. And so that it has been very enjoyable, and but probably at the end of the day, it's fun to. What I really like doing is I love presenting with my mother. She is quite a powerhouse presenter, and it is very enjoyable for me to take a back seat with her when we have opportunities to present, and just watch how incredibly impactful, effective she is, even though she's been doing this for quite some time.
And that's so interesting to know how she, you know, didn't even start writing until she'd retired, and in all these years she's written that many books. So yeah, very interesting to hear how, you know, she's taught you how to become a better writer through the process.
Yeah, you know, Dana, it's an interesting thing. I'll digress a little bit here, but you know, a lot of times people kind of hit their creative peak at younger ages, and you know, so like I see it a lot with like with music. So I'm going to give opinion here. Some people may disagree, but I would argue that, you know, Elton John and Billy Joel had a higher degree of creativity in the 1970s and early 1980s than they do now. You know, the Beatles is another good example too. You know, by the time Paul McCartney is 28 or 29 years old, you know, that's the Beatles have completed Let It Be, and they're moving on to individual things. But there are also people, and Pablo Picasso would be a really good example of someone who maintained an incredibly high degree of creativity and developing their art throughout their entire life. So it was never limited to a particular point in his life where he was more creative than another. You know, what I've seen with my mother is this odd thing of, you know, just being 55 and being able to tap into something that, you know, she may have thought about or just kind of lied latent in her, and then be able to actualize it.
Well, tell me a little bit about how your work as a principal for the past 20 plus years has evolved, and how you've helped your school improve its literacy goals in relation to your school's improvement or strategic plan.
That is a really good question. When I was a new principal, I had a very, very high degree of motivation and a very low skill set. And probably wouldn't have wanted to hear that when I was 20 years ago, but as I reflect back, that's exactly how it was. So I think that when I first started the job, I was probably more scalar than I would care to be now. I was probably more direct in my methods than I am right now. And I was probably also less comfortable to be able to tell someone that I didn't know the answer. But what I have found over time is a couple things, and certain truths that I come back to all the time. One is surround yourself with the best people possible, on your admin team and in your building, and create an environment where people feel empowered and where trust and relationships are a really foundational part, of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned the value over time of personal efficacy, of collective efficacy, the importance of culture within a building, the realization that uh, I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I would be concerned if I was.
Mm-hmm.
That that empowering people is a very good thing, and I want to continue to work on opportunities to do that. The one thing that I would say that I have held very very consistent over time is a strong belief in public education and a belief in kids and the capacity for kids to be better, the capacity for the next generation to be wiser, better than our generation, and that education is the key for kids to create the pathway that they want in life. And what I find, so that kind of moves into this realm of like, what's your personal why? Like, why do you do what you do? And what I have found for myself is that that has always been there. Now, there have been times in my life where my life circumstances might have put me out of alignment with that. But the core thing has never changed. It's always been there. But as I've done this job more over time and started to understand my strengths and weaknesses as a leader, what I'm all about and what I want to accomplish, it brings a lot of those things back into clarity and helps me affirm the purpose of what my position really needs to be about, which is about kids, it's about connections, it's about empowering people and helping people grow and become successful, whether it's children becoming successful adults or whether it's teachers becoming the best educator that they can be.
I think that ties well into our next question about some unique challenges that you face right now in August as we set to begin this next school year. So what are challenges that you face as a middle school leader restarting the year in terms of the hybrid plan your district is planning on using? I'm also in a district that's using a hybrid plan. So how is that going to look different?
It's going to look a lot different. Our plan right now, I'll just be really brief, is to divide the student body in half. Mm-hmm. And we will have 4 days of teaching each week. So imagine 2 different colors, let's say red and blue. So the red kids would be 1/2 of the school population. They would be in school on Monday and Wednesday. The blue kids would not be in school on Monday and Wednesday. They'd be in school on Tuesday and Thursday. So when the red kids aren't in school, the blue kids need something to do at home, and we're working on planning that. And of course, vice versa. We're also looking at offering virtual opportunities for families that do not want to send their students back to school, mm-hmm. and working on coordinating that. And we are working on everything else that every other school division is working on, which is safety and our safety protocols, how to make sure that staff are safe in the building, that families have confidence in the safety protocols that we have, making sure that we are communicating with our families and keeping people abreast of all the changes, because things are changing very, very rapidly. I'm certainly no different here than anywhere else. This has become very politicized across the country, where people have very, very strong opinions, even about things such as wearing masks. And so we are making some, certainly we'll make sure that our faculty have masks on in the building, that our kids have masks on. We want to make sure that we're using science and recommendations by the CDC to make sure that our kids are as protected as possible. But it's very dynamic and it is changing all the time. Mm-hmm. I would say that, it's been interesting. It's certainly tested me in certain ways, as I'm sure it has you, because mm-hmm. leadership is a very different thing when you are remote. Yeah. And teaching is about relationships, and schools, kids give each other high fives and they hug each other, and they work collaboratively in groups, and they talk and they sing, they play sports, and a lot of those things are going to be on hold until we find a better time. But part of my job also, and this is your job too as a principal, is to tackle the challenges and maintain optimism. Mm-hmm. I have to believe every day that something is better, and it will come.
Mhm.
Doesn't necessarily mean positivity. You know, sometimes it's hard to be positive when there's a lot of things that are not good. A lot of people dying in the country, a lot of families experiencing tremendous hurt. Uh, Not necessarily a positive time.
Mhm.
But as a leader, you can still be optimistic and believe that even though times are hard now, that around the corner something better will come.
Mhm.
So my little piece of the puzzle, you know, as is yours as a principal, is to do everything I can for my kids, my staff, in support of our school board, our superintendent, and our community, and work on creating a plan that makes it safe and as good as possible for the kids.
Mhm.
Realizing that it's going to look a lot different, and also realizing that at any given time it could change.
Yeah. I really like how you point out that our job is to tackle the challenges and maintain optimism, because whether or not as a nation we're going through a rough time, and your community, there might be a lot of stakeholders that have been laid off, and a lot of uncertainty with your families. If we can find just that little piece of positivity throughout the day, or something a teacher is doing in the classroom, whether it's the remote piece or in the building, and something that we can highlight is just a heartwarming moment that the kids experienced in that particular week, and through that video communication to stakeholders, I think that'll go a long way.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that, I always tell, never underestimate how important hope is, for kids in the classroom when they don't do well in assignment, but also for adults and also for a country.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great statement to end with. So out of everything we discussed today on the podcast, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
I think certainly to someone who is an administrator,
Mm-hmm.
I think a good piece of advice that I can always share is be comfortable with not knowing the answers to everything that comes your way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a simple statement, but it really speaks to someone's sense of self. It speaks to someone's security or insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to find effectiveness, you don't need to know every answer, but you can do things, build capacity, empower people, get great people on your team, and work really hard to keep them on your team. And remember the importance of relationships, trust, communication. They are part of the core that makes leadership work or makes leadership not work.
Yeah.
So those would be my core suggestions. It's a
What?
great question.
Yeah, I think that's great to have.
Yeah.
Trust and communication, key factors in building great school culture. Where can people find you online or read your blog?
Thank you for asking. If someone is into Twitter, I am found at capital E, capital R, O, B, capital P, Principal. So at Robb Principal. The blog that I write with my mother is called the Robb Review blog. It's not that complicated. You can look me up, Evan Robb, on LinkedIn. Love to connect on LinkedIn, and also on Facebook. I have a professional page on Facebook. If you just search Evan Robb, you'll find that. I have a small podcast that I do with my mother, particularly focused on literacy. And that's not too complicated either. It's called the Robb Review Podcast. And certainly encourage people to check that out also.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Dana. And of course, from one principal to the other, I wish you all best as you tackle a big leadership challenge also out in Colorado. And I wish you and your families and teachers all the best.
Thank you.